You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions, episode 86. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Happy Sunday, everybody, and welcome to episode 86 of the Tricorder Transmissions. Today we're going to be talking about Gold Key Comics number 6, When Planets Collide. We are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett.
And Craig Cohen. And I got to say, Jeff, based on this cover, I don't even think they were trying with these covers.
Nah, it's another Amok Time screen grab, and it almost looks like Spock is in a football line ready for the ball to get thrown to him.
Yeah, I mean, just incredibly uninspired.
Yeah, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the comic whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So, very strange. This is another Dick Wood comic, so we're still in the Dick Wood era of Gold Key, so that we should expect some of the same weird, wacky terminology that we've been getting in some of the previous issues.
Yeah, we get a ton of it.
Yeah, and Alberto Gigliotti is back again, or Giolitti, I'm sorry, is back again. And this issue was published in December of 1969, and the star date is 23/009. And you know, I want to say this because I feel bad I didn't say this in the last episode that we did, number 5. But number 5 and number 6 both were released after the end of the third season of the original series. So we are officially past the end of the series being on television. And these last 2 issues were post that, but we still have the same writer, and we still have some of the same weirdness. So
yeah,
very, very strange. And you know, the cover blurb is just as strange as the photo is. So the photo is from Amok Time. It's from the Kirk Spock battle on Vulcan, and Spock is standing there waiting for Kirk to charge at him. And the cover blurb reads, "Think fast, Mr. Spock. A freak impulsion is creating galactic disaster." Very, very strange choice of words.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, the comic itself though has some interesting bits in it. So
yeah,
I guess, you know, if you have anything else to say before we get started.
No. I mean, I think anything I want to say we'll cover during the bulk of the issue commentary.
All right. So as we always do, I will. Oh, you know what? Before we move on, I just remembered. I wanted to answer a question that was posted on our Facebook page about what we're doing with the show and where we're going with the show. And I'm sure that we talked about this at some point in the past, but it's probably buried in an old episode somewhere. But someone, I think it was Matt Walsky actually, asked about when we're covering the animated series. And my answer to him was, I think we've said this on the show, but just in case, we are covering the Gold Key comics that came out while the original series was running and between the end of the original series and the beginning of the animated series. So we're going to be covering a couple of years worth of Gold Key comics. Trust me, there aren't that many before we get the animated series itself. So bear with us. We wanted to keep going in chronological order and kind of fill in the gaps. And then we'll do the animated series, and we may alternate between animated series and Gold Key as they happened. Chronologically, and then move on to the rest of the comics and into the movies after that. So that sound right to you, Craig?
Yeah.
Okay. So I hope that clears up the mystery out there, and thanks for bringing that up, Matt. I'm glad that you asked so that we would make sure we clarify that. So as we do with all of these Gold Key comics, we will warn you that we are going to start, and spoilers will begin in case you want to stop this podcast, read the comic, and then come back and listen to us talk about it. So we're going to start talking about the content of the comic in 3, 2, 1. All right. So like the previous issues, we come across the Enterprise patrolling yet another galaxy. This one is the Alpha Galaxy. You know, the bridge operators aboard the ship detect some large unidentified bodies that appear to be on a collision course with each other in space.
Yeah, this is a really interesting splash page, and I wanted to get your take on it because we've got the bridge, and is that engineering superimposed over it, or is that supposed to be a section of the bridge? And then we've also got the meteors that are crashing through.
Yeah, the meteors are actually puncturing holes in the side of the bridge. So it looks like they're meteors actually coming into the bridge and possibly hitting people on the bridge. But yeah, I had the same question as you did because you see what looks like the bridge from Mr. Spock's station's view,
Hmm.
looking across the bridge to the opposite sides. You're seeing Kirk's chair sideways on the side of Kirk's chair and the side of the navigation console and weapons console. But where Spock's station should be, closest to us, are some engineering looking things, some levers there and a circular valve release that a guy's trying to turn. So it looks like they almost got the bridge right.
And I think that's supposed to be Scotty.
Yeah, Scotty actually does feature a little more prominently in this issue than he did prior to this. So nice to see him, and actually McCoy shows up a little bit too. I think this is actually the first real appearance of what could be the bridge, or it looks more like the bridge. And let's see. So Spock informs Kirk that the two bodies are 1 billion miles apart, and the odds that they will collide is very small. So they elect to monitor the situation, and they set a course towards the space bodies. Several days later, the objects are discovered to be planets. This is where Scotty chimes in and asks what they should do if the planets should be actually colliding. Spock informs him that the results would be catastrophic. Shock waves of the two planets colliding would affect a lot of the other planets in the system, knocking some of them out of orbit and causing them to burn up in space. They attempt to contact the two planets but receive no reply to their SOS broadcasts. Kirk makes the decision that one of the two planets that are hurtling towards each other must be destroyed to thwart the possible collision threat. So Spock whips out some paper and does some trigonometry to determine that they are actually closest to the first of the two foreign planet bodies, and they use their full rocket thrust to arrive at that planet a galaxy day later. They still don't detect any life on the planet, so Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and Chief Engineer Scott beam down to place explosive hydrogen charges on the planet. So this is a stopping point here for me. So Craig, I think the planets colliding plot kind of reminds me a little bit of the meteor collision course with the planet in the Paradise Syndrome.
Oh yeah.
Where they had to fly out and try to deflect the asteroid while Kirk lived his Native American fantasy life for a little while.
Yeah, I didn't make that connection.
At least this plot is a little bit different than some of the previous ones.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed this plot because it created an enemy that really wasn't tangible. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it wasn't a villain. It wasn't an alien character or an imposing alien in space somewhere. It was the threat of galactic destruction, which is always nice to have something that's not a monster of the week or an alien of the week type thing.
And looking back at the last couple of pages, we have an interesting technology, I guess, is the Enterprise's TV space scanner.
I'm glad you brought that. Yeah, this is another one of those weird. I mean, that I think in the show they're just condensed into scanners. They don't actually make some sort of a distinction like TV scanners, but we've seen TV scanners in a couple of the prior issues. So a little more of that strange technology, which is nothing really more than the show equivalent of showing something on the big screen, on the view screen in the bridge, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Except it's on a smaller monitor somewhere.
Yeah, and I also am slightly amused by the technique in this issue of abbreviating words and then defining them for us underneath.
Yes, that's kind of funny.
The UB, the FP.
Yeah, the foreign body one. They abbreviate it in the character's dialogue, and then they have a small box underneath where they define what it was. We also have another one of these weird discrepancies between measurements of distance and measurements of time.
Right.
Like we had in the last issue, but this time it's galaxy miles as a measure of distance that they need to travel, and a galaxy day as a unit of time measurement. So I think the last one was lunar miles and lunar days, lunar hours, but yeah, very strange. And of course the full rocket thrust is another no warp engines, no impulse power. It's a full rocket thrust. And of course here's one of my favorite Spock lines of the entire comic, and Spock in reference to the two colliding bodies that are hurtling through space. Spock tells Kirk that we'd better keep our space eyes on them.
Yes.
They're space eyes, so Spock gets space eyes. When I read that line, something clicked in my head, and it made me think back to a couple of the other issues. And I wonder how much of this dialogue is influenced by superhero comics of the day.
Oh, totally.
Because superhero comics back then always had to have these metaphors to describe things, or very descriptive adjectives and things to make things sound more whimsical or fanciful. So space eyes and galaxy miles and stuff like that. I'm curious to go forward in time here in these comics and see when the writer changes and times change, if the terminology changes too.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so on to the next part. So once they beam down to the planet's surface, they actually see a city with some tall buildings and domes on top of them. Of course, they're attacked immediately by one of the turrets located on these buildings. And Kirk and his team, the landing party, are encased in these giant transparent bubbles, which were created, and they were captured, and they're floating up into the sky. The four of them trapped in the balloons are reeled in by some armed guys in purple uniforms on top of one of the long buildings. They're brought inside one of the main towers, and the bubbles are bursted, freeing Kirk, Spock, and Scotty, and they're immediately strapped into these electronic chairs, which apparently have some sort of a magnetic effect that's able to magnetize flesh. So they're kind of stuck to these chairs, and they're subjected to electronic impulses that penetrate their minds. One of the planet inhabitants starts to interrogate them about why they're there and what their intentions are. Kirk tries to convince them that they're space pioneers from the Starship Enterprise, and that they're there to warn them of their planet's collision with another world. So Kirk starts to get a little impatient because of the mind electricity that's pulsing through his head. It grabs his phaser, frees himself, Spock, and Scotty, and then begins to speak the wonderful space Esperanto language to try to convince the aliens that they're on their side. So another moment to unplug real quick, and Scotty has white hair.
Yeah, it is Scotty in name only, really.
Yeah, he's not really Scotty yet, I don't think, in these comics. I think they just had the guy's name. But did you notice, though, back in the first page, that big cover page that you talked about before, that the shirt colors were just green and blue?
Yeah.
No yellow, no red, just green shirts and blue shirts. It's a little bit strange.
And I think that might have been because wasn't there always talk that the captain shirt was more of a green material that looked yellow based on the light?
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah.
The bubble prisons, they kind of remind me of The Prisoner. The giant rolling bubbles that chase after him.
Yeah, and I actually like that. It again, it's another one of those times where the comic book is doing something that the show really couldn't have convincingly done at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think there's any practical effect that they could have used back then to simulate four guys floating in balloons up through the sky and being reeled in. They probably would have had to do something, on the ground, maybe have them rolling around in some sort of a plastic bubble type thing, but.
Yeah, or them on the ground with some kind of bubble superimposed over them. But either way, it really wouldn't have looked as good as it does here in the comic book.
No, for sure. And did the chairs that they're strapped into look like electric chairs to you?
Oh, totally.
With the headgear, I'm like, wow, that looks almost like an execution chair.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the inspiration.
And another appearance of Space Esperanto.
Yes.
You know how much I love Space Esperanto, so I really wish that was on the show.
I do think this is a good time to point out how good the sequential artwork is in this issue, and I guess it's been present with this artist all along, but the storytelling via the artwork is really well done in my opinion.
Definitely, and this is one of those stories I think kind of drags a little bit, but the artwork keeps it really interesting.
Yeah.
The way things are sequenced together, and you can really get a feel for what's going on and where the story is moving to, even though some of the dialogue gets a little bit dry, and the story seems to drag, especially in the middle.
Yeah, well, we'll get there, but the story almost seems to hit the same beat twice, and I really don't think there's any other way they could have done it, but it is a problem.
Yeah, it's a big sore thumb, so we'll get to that in a few minutes when we get there, but definitely on the same page with you. But one thing that I really love about this sequence here, and one of the high points in this comic for me, is that this Kirk moment, because this really throws me back into the show where Kirk is reaching for his phaser and pulls the phaser out. He just gets tired of this crap. And we see him do that in the show all the time. And he just kind of lashes out, frees his comrades, and then just gets really stern with the aliens. But not in a way that he's going to kill them or vaporize them, but he's just trying to make a point that they're there to help, and he has to get forceful. And I think that Kirk moment is the most Kirk moment I think I've seen in all the issues leading up to this one. This is probably the best one.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
All right. So the alien leader understands what's going on thanks to the Esperanto and the shouting and the phaser, and asks for some help to avoid this upcoming catastrophe. So Kirk and Spock explain to them that the only hope is if the other planet is uninhabited, they could atomize it, but they're going to have to check it out first to make sure there's nobody on it. Suddenly, there's a huge, bright, blazing light that comes through the windows. Kirk thinks it's another trap. The alien leader explains that it's the light of their artificial sun that they had to create centuries ago when their own sun died, which left their world almost a block of ice. Kirk and his team are taken down by some elevators into a deep underground cavern and shown a sprawling underground landscape with farmland, rivers, cattle, and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, I love Scotty's, I guess that's Scotty's reaction.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a surprise, his reaction doesn't really match what they're actually seeing.
No, it's very, very weird. It's an agricultural complex. So you see this panel where you're seeing from an overhead view almost, this whole farm, like a high-tech farm area with some equipment driving around. And they reveal that the planet's name is Morty. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Morti.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And the artificial light of that artificial sun shines through some skylights, allowing the crops to grow, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And ever since the sun went cold, the people of Morty they used to live on the surface, but they farmed all of their food below ground since it can't grow on the surface anymore. So they trigger the artificial sun only 5 hours a day to conserve its very valuable fuel. And that explains why the Enterprise didn't detect the life there.
And on that page where we learn that they're only using the sun 5 hours a day, we have a Spock shot in the upper right corner that looks like it's a grab directly from the TV show.
Nice. Good pick. I'll have to go look at that again. I didn't pick up on that when I was reading the comic. So let's talk a little bit about Scotty's dialogue since you brought that up. I actually wrote it down. I transcribed it here. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this properly, but upon seeing this farm landscape, Scotty yells, "Yipes!" And this is the one I'm going to stumble over. Is it bejabbers? Bejabbers?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah.
If we have any Scottish people in the audience, let me know if bejabbers is an exclamation in Scotland when you're surprised by something.
Yeah.
That really struck me as odd. And Kirk actually has another weird word that he uses in this section, too. He asks Spock if they're being boondoggled.
Yes. And then, he then explains what boondoggled is.
Yeah, he uses the word boondoggled and then has to clarify to Spock, not because Spock asked, but he immediately clarifies and says, or are we being put on, quote unquote. And, the underground agriculture reminds me a lot of the Genesis cave from Wrath of Khan.
Oh, yeah. That's another great observation.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool. I mean, I like the idea of a civilization that was forced to move underground. And it's pretty neat that they don't just live in a cave. They actually hollowed it out and made a world of their own out of it.
Totally.
Kind of a cool thought. I wonder if we'll ever have to do that. But anyway, anything else before we move on to the next part?
Nope.
Alrighty then. Upon talking with the aliens and saying that they're going to find a way to help them, Kirk, Spock, and Scotty depart for the second planet. As the Enterprise speeds away, Spock's sensors detect no life on that other planet, so they're kind of hopeful. As they near the second doomed planet, one reading indicates that the planet's mountainous terrain is comprised of an unknown, highly active metal. Soon, the interior of the Enterprise is a stage for weird happenings as Scotty is thrown against a wall and winds up getting stuck to a bulkhead. He's being attracted by a piece of the ore that he collected from planet Morty that's in his pocket and is being attracted to the magnetism of the other world. So Spock takes the ore sample and deduces that it's being magnetized from below, and it jumps out of his hand and slams up against the wall. So he gets the idea that maybe he can figure out a way to use some other reactions from some ores that they may have on the Enterprise to counteract the magnetism and thwart the need for them to destroy the second planet. He actually exclaims, though, that the electromagnetic force of this other planet, or the mountains on this planet, are more powerful than the most powerful electromagnet that's known to them today. So even though the other planet looks uninhabited, Spock still resists blowing it up and instead tries to find a way to chemically neutralize it before they go to that extreme measure. And unfortunately, Spock does fail in that attempt. So, all right. So another quick stopping point. I think this is the second reference to this, because I think you brought this up in a prior episode. I don't remember which one. Kirk makes a reference to suffering Hannah again.
Yeah.
I know he mentioned Hannah in some other way prior to this, and this when Scotty is being slammed into the wall, Kirk explains suffering Hannah. He's being slammed into a wall. Yeah, it's kind of a strange one. And this kind of struck me as odd too, is that we don't see Spock fail a lot on the TV show, but yet Spock fails here.
Yeah.
This would be a perfect opportunity for Spock to come up with a solution to something. This would be the hero moment in the show where he does make it happen.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
So I was a little disappointed in that because, once again, as has happened in several other issues in the past, it seems like Kirk really gets to reap all of the glory of making the right choices, and Spock isn't really necessarily allowed to be Spock.
I will say, though, that this segment, I really sort of dug the quote-unquote action here. It's a very sort of non-traditional action moment with that piece of ore.
Yeah, they kind of made it a little more exciting. What could have been a sequence that really dragged, just going from one planet to another. At least they, instead of just scanning something and saying, oh, it's really highly magnetic, they demonstrated it and made it a little more gripping. So good on them for that. And the artwork, of course, is awesome as well through this sequence. So it tells the story really well. So a landing party consisting of Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and McCoy this time beams down to the second planet in an attempt to set up some atomic charges that are going to destroy these mountains and thus eliminate this magnetic pull. So the team spends about 4 hours drilling holes into the rocks and placing a bunch of charges. And just about their return to the Enterprise, having finished the job, Spock, out of the corner of his eye, spies some movement. They investigate but find nothing. Spock turns to wonder what he saw, just as a large rock slides open and an alien grabs a hold of him and pulls him into a secret tunnel. So Spock is sliding down a long chute that leads into some dark caverns. Kirk and company jump down to follow along and see the alien who grabs Spock. Spock arrives at the end of the tunnel and is kind of awed by a technologically advanced underground city, yet again, populated by some green guys with scales on their bodies, wearing dark green pants instead of purple. So several people approach Spock and question him, just as we had heard on the previous planet. And the alien that threw Spock down the chute arrives and informs them that more aliens are coming down the chute, chasing after them. So fearing that there's going to be a misunderstanding, Spock tries to plead their case and tells them about the collision coming from the other planet and that he and the landing party are there to help. Doesn't necessarily work too well. The landing party is subdued by some energy rings by the aliens in order to keep them at bay while they get questioned again. The alien leader is of the Innicrust people, and he asks Kirk and Spock why they're there and what they're doing there, and they answer that they are going to destroy the mountains because the mountains were pulling the other planet closer and were going to cause the collision. So the alien leader believes them, but goes on to tell them that the power that's generated by those mountains is what they're using to power their underground facilities and in order to keep their way of life going. So they need to figure out a way to stop the two planets from colliding without destroying the mountains, because the mountains not being there would cause the destruction of this civilization. So Kirk and Spock and the team go back up to the Enterprise to try to figure out how to solve this, as Spock promises that there may be one slim chance to overcome this problem without having to destroy one of the planets. So, another stopping point.
It's interesting that it almost seems like a major trope in the Star Trek universe that is common between the comic book and the TV show is sort of the subterranean inhabitants of planets.
Yeah, well, and we know that on the show, as much as we like to think that it was done for the sake of the stories, we know a lot of that was done for the sake of budget
Yeah.
and not having to build and rebuild new sets or film outdoors. So a lot of alien worlds and alien civilizations were underground or in caves. I guess the comic kind of went along with that in a way. I just think for me, having two civilizations that were undetectable by the Enterprise and having them both be these underground civilizations is a little too similar, and it makes it a little difficult to buy into.
Yeah, and this is also sort of where we get that repeated story beat, which is, it creates that deja vu moment as you're reading it.
Yeah, yeah, it really did. So you get they get captured and questioned, and then accepted on the first planet, and then the exact same thing repeats on the second planet. And I think that the name of these aliens kind of bugs me a little bit too. Although, I mean, I guess it's not as bad as some of the ones we've seen prior to this, the Justins, but the inner crust people still kind of hits a little on the nose to me that they're inside the crust of the planet. So, I mean, it seems a little bit lazy. One thing that really bugged me too about this sequence, and I didn't mention it while we were talking through the story bit, but when Spock sees the alien on the surface and he's looking for him but can't find him, Kirk blames it or tries to blame it on his nerves, Spock's nerves. And that is just not a valid assessment of a Vulcan, in my opinion. Like, Kirk should know better that Spock wouldn't be suffering some nervous condition or overwork, unless it was Pon farr time.
Yeah, yeah.
But no evidence of that. So I that kind of disconnected me a little bit from the show more. And if this was the show, Kirk wouldn't judge Spock in that way.
I totally hear what you're saying.
I don't think. And another reference to galaxy years here. So this planet has been like this for 1,000,000 galaxy years. So once again, galaxy years is a measure of time, but galaxy miles is a measure of distance. So scratch your head, people. Scratch your head. Yeah. So ready to move forward?
Yep.
All right. So we're back aboard the ship again.
Yeah, and we're about to get a huge left field moment, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. So Spock is being very dodgy about the questions about what the slim chance could be. And he goes and activates a deep galaxy scope screen, which he's going to locate what he refers to as a true wonder of the universe. And it appears on screen, which is it's a giant luminous particle from the star Duna. It seems when Duna had gone supernova, one part of that star failed to disintegrate along with the rest of it, and leaving a giant 10,000-ton piece floating in space. For centuries, Spock says, Vulcan scientists studied the phenomenon because the piece had 10 times the hardness of space diamonds and a 10th magnitude repelling force. So conveniently, this thing is relatively close enough where they can go harness it and pull it back where they need to use it. So the Enterprise goes towards this chunk of Duna, and the plan is put into place to ensnare it with a sort of a magnetic field and tow it behind the Enterprise and tow it back to where these two planets are to prevent them from crashing into each other. So they accelerate really quickly around the chunk of Duna and ensnare it and start to bring it back, only to be caught in a meteor shower, which was foreshadowed in the first splash page we were talking about earlier, where all the meteorite pieces are smashing through the hull of the ship, which I think would create a hell of a vacuum inside the bridge and suck everybody out. But they have shields, so maybe that's keeping them all inside. But the ship has to blow out some final fuel to accelerate past the meteor shower and make it back to the two planets in time to make their plan work. So another stopping point here. I love that Spock mentioned Vulcan scientists studying this collapsed star.
Yeah, but the collapsed star sort of seemed like a rabbit being pulled out of a hat moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like a callback that we were. It just seemed like a cheat to me.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. I like the concept, but I agree that it was a little too convenient.
Yeah.
To the story. In fact, I mean, I would have rather them come up with some sort of a solution using the tools at hand, within the Enterprise or some gotcha moment, maybe something with dilithium crystals and
Right.
something of that nature. But
Mm-hmm.
I really love one of my favorite panels of this entire comic is the panel where Kirk is walking solo down that darkened corridor with that window on the side, thinking about the risk to the Enterprise and kind of questioning Spock and wondering if the whole thing is worth the risk to his ship and his crew. I thought that was a really great Kirk moment and really well drawn and very moody lighting in that. It really conveys the heaviness.
I would agree, and I think that's another moment where the comic and the show really sort of aligns in terms of the innovative use of lighting to tell the story.
I like that you said that because we've been saying a lot in our previous talks about these comics that it didn't look like they took many cues from the show at all. In fact, most of the characters don't even look like themselves, and we didn't even see the bridge until just this issue. To have a coincidence like that with this dramatic lighting used in the comic to convey a mood, just like it was on the show, it makes me feel like we're going to get a little closer in the next few issues to what we're used to seeing, and I'm excited to find out what's coming down the pike.
Yeah.
Yeah, another interesting shot of the exterior of the ship with parts of it cut away so that you can see the insides.
Yeah.
Of the Enterprise, although I don't think that's very accurately drawn because I think the Enterprise has several more decks than what are depicted in that image, but pretty cool that they tried it.
Yeah, I mean that's another tool that the comic book had at its disposal that the show really didn't have at the time, or when the show aired.
Yeah, we couldn't get that kind of I don't think the model actually had an interior, so they couldn't break pieces away and show us what the inside of the ship looked like, and we didn't have any CG at the time. But this I found very interesting. There was a panel where they were talking about how fast the Enterprise was going, and it got up to 110,000 miles per second. So I did the math, and I figured out that that's 396 million miles an hour.
Wow.
So in an hour, and the speed of light is 670.6-ish million miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going a little bit faster than half the speed of light at that point.
Right.
So pretty interesting. We still don't have any reference to the warp engines or to impulse power, but we get a little bit of a reference of how fast they were supposed to be going. And another strange terminology reference here, the meteor shower were like hailstones from space Hades. Space Hades. Everything is space something.
Yeah.
Galaxy miles, space eyes, and space Hades. So there's a space version of hell out there. All right. So anything before we get on to the conclusion?
Nope.
All right. So a few hours later, the Enterprise, on its errand of mercy, arrives at the nearly collided planets. It's getting very close. Planets Innicrust and Morty are only 4 galaxy minutes from hitting each other.
Mm-hmm.
So with an extra burst of speed, the Enterprise flies between the two, threading the needle, and deposits the giant chunk of star between the two planets, and the repelling force, the two worlds slow down and finally break and hover in the skies in space, which is, everybody is saved, the day is saved. And because they had no surface buildings, supposedly both planets were not harmed by the moderate earthquakes caused by their deceleration. No, I still think that people would get thrown around a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Rapid deceleration. But Kirk and Spock are happy by the outcome, and they share a drink.
Yeah.
And have a toast.
And then the issue abruptly ends, and I was looking at the page count. Is this one of the longer issues that we've run into so far?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, and it seems like the story suffered for it because I almost thought there was a page missing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this is what I was thinking, that there was so many draggy bits during this that I felt like they could have really trimmed down to make room for more resolution.
Yeah, you think we would have at least gotten maybe a moment where we heard from each planet at least expressing thanks for being saved.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and the resolution is not even really a resolution because it's only a temporary measure. They say it should hold for centuries. Perhaps by the time that it stops working, they'll know how to really solve the problem. And Spock says, yeah, that was what I was thinking too. It seemed a little bit of a non-ending.
Yeah.
To me. I'm not sure how I feel about Spock and Kirk having a toast at the end of the comic either. I mean, they don't say that it's alcohol, but page 32, panel 2 has a picture of Spock using a pad and pencil.
Very, very good catch.
Yeah. Once again, there's those spiral notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's making spiral notebooks in the future. Yeah, and I like I said, I'm not really too keen on the way they close this story up. I would have liked a more permanent resolution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they're gonna have to keep coming back and checking on them.
Yeah, well, yeah, at least Starfleet will have to, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, well, that brings us to the end of Gold Key Comics number 6. Craig, do you have a non-canon essential vote for this one?
I actually would probably make an argument that this is probably essential.
Really?
Just based on the amount of terminology that's used, and maybe the definitive presentation of the TV space scanner.
I was trying to think if I was going to go essential on this comic or not, and there's a couple of things I'm leaning on that are pushing me sort of to one side of the fence, and the fact that the first appearance of the bridge happens here, which I think is really cool, even though it's still not exactly the bridge that we know, it is a version of the bridge, so that's pretty cool. And I love the Kirk moment with the phaser and rescuing his comrades and being the Kirk we know on the show. So that's pretty cool too. I like some of the references to how fast the Enterprise is traveling. Mm-hmm. So you get some exact numbers, which is cool. We get a call out to Vulcan scientists and something the Vulcans have studied, that Duna star, which is pretty cool. So you know what? I guess maybe I'll go essential on this too, a non-canon essential vote. So I think this is our first double essential non-canon comic.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Good way to wrap it up. So that brings this episode of Tricorder Transmissions to a close. Craig, it's cool sitting down and talking to you as always.
Oh yeah, totally. And I'll see you next Sunday.
Yeah, and catch up with us on Facebook at facebook.com/Tricorder Transmissions, Twitter at TTT_pod, and our website at tricordertransmissions.com. And we look forward to seeing you